But first, colossal news in college football. Nick Saban has retired. This according to Chris Lowe. This came in about 40 minutes ago. It's obviously circulated all around social media, all around every college football circle, and every fan, every player, every coach, etc. Nick Saban, no longer the head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide. They would be looking for their new head coach for the first time since George W. Bush was president. It's been that long. So, first and foremost, let's give love and give credit where it's due. Before we even get to why Saban retired, what's next for Alabama, Nick Saban is the greatest college football coach of all time. It's not particularly close. With respect to Bear Bryant, with respect to Lou Holtz, with respect to any great coach you want to throw out there, it's not even close. Nick Saban's the GOAT. So Nick Saban at the University of Alabama, this is just at Alabama, okay? 199-23, he won 89.6% of the football games that he coached with the Crimson Tide. He has, I'm not even going to count them up because it's too many, 9 SEC titles. And he won not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, but 6 national championships, and solidified himself, obviously, as the greatest coach in Alabama history, surpassing the great Bear Bryant. Therefore, with Bear Bryant being the kind of consensus GOAT coach, Saban surpassed him in that regard as well. In his career in general, if you include LSU as well as previous destinations, Nick Saban, 292 career wins, 11 SEC championships, and 7 national championships. The national titles is the record. I wasn't able to get the proper research in because it just came in so recently to see if that was the record for SEC championships. He's also won Coach of the Year twice, which is an absolute joke. Nick Saban's won Coach of the Year twice. Kind of reminds me of how Tom Brady's won MVP 3 times. Like, you're telling me Tom Brady played 23 years and he won 3 MVPs? Are you kidding me? LeBron's played 21. He's got 4 MVPs. Like, what are we doing here? But that aside, I think Nick Saban retired. First of all, he is 72 years old. We got to factor that in as well. That's, I think, in played in some parts the reason why Belichick may step down, although I think Belichick still wants to coach. We'll talk about Pete Carroll later. I saw his press conference today. Sounds like Pete still wants to coach. That sounds like it was more of a decision from the front office. This was Nick's decision. And there had been speculation. There had been discussion about whether or not this was a real possibility. Because of the fact that, hey, Nick is 72. Georgia has very clearly surpassed Alabama. I know Alabama did beat Georgia to their credit in the SEC title game. It's fitting that Saban was able to get one last W over another assistant coach before he rode off into the sunset, obviously, after that loss to Michigan a couple weeks ago, or really last week. But Georgia has surpassed Alabama. Georgia is kind of the new dynasty of college football. They've won 2 of the last 3 national titles. And Nick Saban, I think, in some respects, has kind of seen the writing on the wall in the sense that recruiting was already hard. NIL's made it harder. Now, before y'all come at me, oh, you're against NIL. I've been one of the biggest NIL proponents since I started my show 4.5 years ago, before NIL was even legal, made legal by the Supreme Court. Like, I've always been a proponent of the athletes getting paid. I wholeheartly support the athletes in that regard. But I also, in some respects, kind of have sympathy for the coaches in the sense that, man, this makes recruiting and getting high school athletes all the more harder, especially in college football, which we know is the richest college sport out there, over college basketball, men's or women's, softball, baseball, swimming, the whole bit. Doesn't matter what the sport is. And Nick Saban probably saw the writing on the wall, was like, I don't know, I'm 72, still in reasonably good health, at least from what we can see. Right off in the sunset, beat Georgia. My last SEC game of my career was an SEC title against my guy Kirby Smart, my former defensive coordinator, and really kind of I shouldn't say the heir apparent to Nick Saban, but kind of like a younger version of Saban in a certain respect. It's time. And Nick Saban stepped away. Keep in mind the fact that we all generally agreed that this Alabama team was not close to Nick Saban Alabama teams of years past, of the 6 national titles, or even the championships they got to and lost. See the Clemson game, see games in which they lost to Georgia in the national title game. They weren't near as talented at quarterback with Jalen Milroe. It's not a shot at Jalen. He's not near Bryce Young, what Bryce Young did in college, or guys like Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts. Heck, Mac Jones was as good as Mac Jones in college. And then Alabama offensive line was nothing short of atrocious. I saw the stat coming into the college football playoff that Alabama was number 1 sacks given up of the 4 playoff teams. They given up more sacks by themselves than the other playoff teams, the other 3 playoff teams combined. So Alabama really struggled to protect the quarterback, and then that was a massive problem for them. Defense wasn't quite as talented outside the kid. Dallas Turner, nice linebacker, really like him going into the NFL. It just wasn't as talented of a team. And Nick Saban still went 12-2 with an SEC title, and his only 2 losses were to Texas, who got to the college football playoff, and Michigan, who I'll talk about in about 10 minutes, who's the national champions today. And both came down to the wire. Job well done, Nick. You went out at the top of your game. This was one of the most impressive coach. I said all season long, this is one of the most impressive I've ever been watching Nick Saban coach an Alabama team. And keep in mind, too, and this is why, even as a Tennessee fan, even as a guy who watched Nick Saban go 16-1 against my Vols. 2022 was something special. But Saban owned Tennessee like he owned just about everybody else. The one thing that I always appreciate about Nick Saban, there's a lot of things to appreciate. Developed players, changed God knows how many kids' lives. He told a story about one kid he coached at Michigan State that was dealing with some off-the-field stuff. Nick Saban didn't. A lot of people were wanting Nick Saban to cut the guy. He didn't. He just gave him a suspension, came back, and the guy now runs a company. Like, Nick Saban's the type of dude, doesn't give up on players, believes in guys, sees the best in young kids, because ultimately they're kids. They're going to make mistakes. Nick Saban saw the good in them in that regard, and ultimately they're better off for being coached by him. So there's a lot of things to admire about Nick Saban. The thing that I always appreciate about Nick Saban is something that oftentimes a lot of coaches don't do. Evolve, change, adapt. See how things are maybe changing in a certain direction in your sport, culturally speaking, and adapting with it. Whatever the case was, because when Nick Saban came in at Alabama in 2007, took him just a couple years, 2009, bam, national champions. Beat Texas, beat Mack Brown and that loaded Texas team in order to do so. His quarterback at the time is a guy who now works at ESPN, does a great job for the network, Greg McElroy. Greg McElroy was nowhere near an NFL talent, but Nick Saban was able to take a team with Mark Ingram there. Mark Ingram won the Heisman Trophy that year. At that time, college football, heck, really football in general, was a ground and pound defense. Not that it's not to a certain degree today, but certainly not as much as it was 15 years ago in 2009, when it was run the football, play action, convert on third down, have your quarterback be a good game manager, and just beat the you-know-what out of teams on defense. That's what college football was, and Nick Saban, that played right into his wheelhouse. And they won in 2009, in 2011, and in 2012. But around 2014-15, the game started to shift a little bit. Yes, he won with Jake Coker in 2015. Jake Coker didn't do really anything at all at the next level, but he had Derrick Henry and great defensive players. But around 2015-ish, the game started to shift a little bit. Started to become more quarterback-centric. You were seeing these younger coaches, Lincoln Riley, come into the mix and make an instant impact with guys like Baker Mayfield and eventually Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts. And rather than resting on his laurels and saying, no, I'm going to do it my way. Screw what the game is now. I'm going to adapt. I'm going to adjust. And I'm going to go get Jalen Hurts. He's going to take me to a national title in 2016. I'm going to come literally a second away from winning a national title that year against Clemson. Bringing this kid Tua. Remember that? Jalen Hurts bench. Tua comes in, wins the national title game. I'm going to develop this kid, this talented quarterback, Tua, as the game shifts more to quarterbacks. Tua does his thing. Mac Jones even. Mac Jones. Bad NFL quarterback. Nick Saban took him and said, you know what? There's limitations there that we didn't have with Jalen and Tua. So we're going to surround him with some great receivers. Devontae Smith, who won the Heisman. Henry Ruggs, we know the situation there. Najee Harris, great running back, but could catch passes out of the backfield. Great offensive line. Amazing offensive line. Cover up the flaws so that the quarterback looks good, because the quarterback is going to have to win games for us in today's college football. Then Bryce Young. Very much an escape artist, getting out to the pocket, kind of Russell Wilson-esque, not as big as Russell, as thick as Russell, but able to make plays in that regard, playing to his strengths. And Jalen Milroe, who's not a natural thrower, excellent running the football, much better athlete than he is a quarterback. Nick Saban got the most out of him, and they got to within literally a couple plays of getting to the national championship game. Again, Nick Saban evolved. Nick Saban didn't stay stuck in his ways. He wasn't Bobby Knight. He's not Dabo Swinney, who refuses to embrace the transfer portal and NIL. Nick Saban adapted to these things. Nick Saban adapted to how coaches in the modern times interact with their players. In 2015, not to say coaches, shouldn't, not that there's just one way to coach, obviously, but Nick Saban came in, it's very much a rah-rah, getting dudes' faces. And whether it's, these young kids, be soft, whatever the case may be, he kind of adapted to that. Gave kids more attaboys. Gave them, I shouldn't say more love than he used to, but oftentimes would give them much more words of approval and praise. He adapted in that regard too. Part of what makes Nick Saban the greatest coach of all time is how when the times changed, he didn't stay stuck in his ways. He still stayed true to his core tenets. There's no question about that. But he said, what I got to do to win? Okay, I'll do that. And like all smart people, which Nick Saban is obviously very, very smart, he adjusted. Nick Saban, hats off. Phenomenal career. Doesn't even begin to describe. He's the greatest college football coach of all time. And again, it ain't close. Best wishes in retirement. Nothing but the best. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube, and be sure to go click that big red subscribe button and check out the other clips and full shows from Carving It Up Live, as well as our other incredible content creators here on the Grid Network.